Good morning and welcome to the second Altron Governance by Design session. My name is Daniel Robus and I will be your MC today. And with us, we've got an amazing panel. We've got Gareth Delaporte, Don Curl, and Grant Long, who I'll introduce in a moment. But first, just an overview of where we are and what we're doing. With the rapid change in the working world, it's inevitable that there are problems emerging throughout enterprises. Divisions are being forced to change or are doing it proactively, and often the momentum is not equal across the organization. Here, one team's embracing agile, the other deploying AI, and everyone thinking that they're optimizing processes for the company. Unfortunately, this can result in multiple conflicting strategies, which at best slow each other down or at worst work against one another. There's a definite benefit to adopting an overarching governance framework which can guide, protect, and propel an organization to new levels of accelerated delivery and excellence. But it's not that simple. And I think that's why Altron is doing these sessions and why we want to speak to the experts who have been in the field and have taken some battle scars. And as you can see from the panel, they're all scarred, bruised, and battered. We'll start with Grant, bottom left on my screen, who's the practice lead for data privacy. Grant's ability to simplify the complex is probably the thing that I enjoy most about Grant and looking over his career. He can speak complex solutions and ideas to someone like myself who comes from a very different background. Plus his energy and dynamism just makes projects go through a lot easier. Don Curl specializes in the implementation of identity and unstructured data risk compliance platforms to assist companies across South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Europe to comply with POPI and GDPR legislation. So quite a busy oak at the moment. We're really grateful for your time. I know you enjoy bringing dark data into the light and exposing the risk, which in South Africa might keep you quite busy at the moment. And then Garth Delaporte is Micro Focus Channel Executive, responsible for extending the value of Micro Focus offering to South African partners, who's also doing quite a good job because all of the partners at the moment seem to be pretty busy and pretty geared in. And that brings us to governance as an idea is something that we hear people spouting from the pulpit, how governance needs to be in place, how it needs to be enforced. But I think people are just struggling with how do you start well? And how do we get this momentum going so that we create the right approach and focus on people, processes, and policies at the same time? So I want to just start off by asking, Gareth, do you think companies are falling into the trap of overcomplicating this issue?
Daniel, most certainly. You know, it is a bit of a complicated undertaking. Because you're really touching everything within the enterprise that is information related. The problem being is that sometimes we don't build the kind of right foundation, you know, for us to really address the discipline in quite the correct manner. So by not having the right foundation, by not really approaching it quickly, it's a bit of a pragmatic approach. It shouldn't be something that's taken on big bang. It's something that's taken on based on the risk associated to those information silos that you have, where that particular risk could actually reside, and really it's pragmatic. So, you know, we been to many customers, and Altron and I firsthand have been to many customers where we've seen that they've either tried to go at it too big bang, or they've made it just way more complicated than it really needs to be, and hence we formulated as two organizations methodology to help steer the thinking, if you wish, and the considerations around actually building a proper information lifecycle management landscape. You know, not just in the context of privacy, not just in the context of trying to, you know, meet the papaya framework laws, etc., but really to help customers on a journey end to end, build a comprehensive information lifecycle management approach, but making that a lot more simpler.
Okay, I want to pause you there, Gareth. I want to ask Don. Don, just a really simple question. I thought ERP sorted this out. I thought that's what these big systems did for organizations. Why are we still at this juncture?
So your ERP systems is not necessarily data governance systems. That's the simple short of it. It's not necessarily the right tool set for this. It doesn't contain the right methodology for this. It doesn't break it down the way that we would break it down to actually approach this problem. So this is a completely different beast, if I can call it that. It is unfortunately a beast in South Africa that's actually approached us very quickly, but it doesn't lie with exactly ERP.
Okay, so our systems of records are creating areas where we can get data from, but it's not giving us data governance per se. And that's where we would need to, that's why we're having it. Grant, why is data governance all of a sudden, both Gareth and Don are saying that data governance has just come like the tide, like a tsunami? Why is it at the forefront of conversations these days? I've lost Grant. Grant?
Grant, you're on mute there, sir.
Don, do you want to take that one while we wait to sort out Grant's?
Okay, sorry, just repeat the question for me quickly, please.
So why is data governance now such an issue? I mean, we in 2021 in April, and everybody's talking about data governance. Why is it now top of mind?
So I think the thing that brought this to the foreground all of a sudden out of the blue, in all fairness, is the appointment of the regulator, which happened roughly middle of last year, or actually the year before. And it's actually coming into effect. So the regulator has actually given the companies in South Africa a certain time to comply to the laws, to the POPI Act, and to also, for example, the same thing would happen with GDPR as well. So they were given a certain time to comply with this, and the deadline for this is actually now looming. It's right around the corner. But I think one thing we also do need to speak to about that point is that even though we have this POPI Act coming down the line, and GDPR has been in place for a while already with the standards in Europe, POPI is not, it's not a stick, okay? When we talk about governance and data governance, information lifecycle management, we're talking about a collection of laws and regulations that have actually been in place in South Africa since 1999. They just haven't really been enforced. Now what's happening with the POPI Act, there is actually some clauses in there that makes a lot of the laws in South Africa more enforceable, like, for example, the protection of privacy, the information access acts, and that type of thing. Simple things like information technology acts. So it makes, POPI pulls all that stuff together, and there is, it just ties it into one basket. So it's a very big.
Do you think for the first time now, the regulator actually has teeth that can enforce these things now, whereas before there were more guidelines? Grant, are you back yet? Can we hear you? Let's try it again. No, okay, we don't have Grant. We may have to move him. Gareth, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? Information governance is something that a lot of organizations have potentially scuppered around for quite some time, right? You know, realistically, in the past, as information grew, so we would throw more hardware at the situation, etc. But the reality of today is that information is essentially the lifeblood of your organization. Companies, not only just from a supplier perspective, are really looking at the information they have in order to house value out of it. Things like papaya laws and GDPR laws are really helping companies drive towards actually getting hold of their information governance objectives, right? So it's helping them in that direction. But ultimately, you know, managing information, understanding it, understanding what you have, what it consists of, what level of priority it is to your business, how it can be used to harvest value out of it. Those are some of the real good benefits that are coming out of you know, finally actually managing the information that sits within the enterprise.
Okay. So when we did the preparation, we were talking about people, process, and policy of taking the right approach. Don, do you recommend tackling each of these independently? So training your people, updating your optimizing your processes, and updating policies. How do those three pillars fit into the right governance approach?
So exactly where the complexity of data access governance comes from, because they are separate pillars, but they are also part of one big pillar, and it's like a triangle. So you have to address all three of them with equal importance, because if you don't, then the triangle will fail. But they also one bigger picture. So for example, people control. You need to start actually looking at something, and to use this as a simple example, people in an organization and users on the network need to start understanding that they are effectively the custodians of your data. Okay. If, for example, go and save something that somebody has sent you to mail, you know, you save it to, for example, a company's, to your OneDrive or to a file server, you know, that you've saved there actually puts your organization at risk. It puts them at massive risk, because nobody's checking what you saved. It's, for example, a PDF, you saved it there, and 2 years down the line, you know, an auditor walks in and he finds this file, and this file actually causes an audit breach. It might be, for example, a copy of somebody else's ID that you saved in a OneDrive. Now, that is supposed to actually then go into a records management system. If it was company related, it should go into a records management system, and it should actually be, it should be treated and managed as such. So that is where this tool sets and things comes in, where we say, and where we have this thing going, the end point to data governance and privacy is records management at the end of the day. We have to, you have to understand the data that you're saving, because that puts you at risk.
So these people creating islands of data, or not even understanding the law, is where we are. They're opening security holes, not intentionally, but do you find, Grant, that people are looking at processes sufficiently in this sort of context with data governance in mind from a business analyst's perspective? It's a tough question, I know. Welcome back. Welcome back. We hope we've got audio.
Thanks, Daniel. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, flat out.
Perfect. So interesting question, Daniel. I think it all depends on the maturity of the organization and whether and how far they've embarked on their journey with this data governance program. But ultimately, what we're finding is in those processes, so there's a couple of things: processes, policies, and procedures that contribute to proper data governance or proper records management. Ultimately, as Don was saying, leads to records management. And when we look at the processes, we typically find that they're in isolation, or they're not taking into account the actual data governance framework, or ultimately the records management component thereof. They lead towards it and they contribute towards it, but they don't take that ultimately to. So we bring that together through our methodology that we have in the various work streams that we run within organizations, and we are able to, we enable that to contribute to their data governance framework. And we also review our policies, because that contributes to a big component. We kick off with the policies, and we find that we need to revisit these policies on a regular basis to make sure that they're still viable to the situation.
So we're gonna circle back to that, because I think the policies are often overlooked when it comes to a data governance framework. Just a simple question, and it can be for anyone on the platform or on the panel, because I think we're going to disagree. Where does the responsibility for a data governance framework sit? Is it in IT? Is it in business? Is it in the middle?
So
Gareth,
I can jump in there.
So give me a vote first. Give me a vote first. Where does it sit? And we'll go through all three, and then we'll go. Where does it sit from your side, Gareth?
So firstly, there's the custodians of it, but ultimately it's a responsibility of every person within an enterprise, within an organization, to really manage information. Right? It's not something that's just going to lie with the CIO or with the data privacy office. Yes, there might be, the privacy office might be the custodians of it and the holders of the policy, but at the end of the day, If you're an employee of a company and you leave stuff on a printer that's sensitive information, you essentially violating, you're putting your own organization at risk, right? So it really actually lies with everybody.
And Don, do you agree with that? Who carries the can for data governance?
I 100% agree with him. Remember what I said to you, Nana? I said, if you receive something on a mail and you save it in the wrong place, you are placing your company at risk. Whether you be an employee or part of the board, it is between business and between the end user. It is a collaborative and collective effort.
Okay. Grant, who gets fired if there's a data breach because the data governance isn't managed?
So who carries the can is a bit different to the culture. So the can is the executives and the DIOs and things like that. But I agree with Gareth and Don. It's a holistic, it's a cultural thing. You need to embed it into your organization's cultural effectiveness, and the digital adoption needs to be had. And you know, if people understand the value of data and the information that they have, the culture or the value comes out of it for that organization.
Okay, so we're all responsible for this. How do companies best enable people to understand their role that they play? I'm going to start top left again, Gareth, because I cut you off there. How do companies enable their people to be custodians of data? What's the right approach?
That's sometimes where a lot of these projects go horribly wrong, right? Is not getting that kind of buy-in, enterprise buy-in from all of the stakeholders, all of the people within the organization. So the first thing is policies and procedures. The next thing is being able to communicate that out to all of your staff so that they understand what it is they should be adhering to, you know, how it is they should be treating information, customers' information. So it's very consultative from internally within that company. So, you know, we have the policies and the procedures, we replicate them out to the employees, you know, we make sure that they're well understood by the employees, and we all, as I say, have that responsibility to manage information in a certain way, you know. So if I look at my company as an example, you know, we don't share stuff and we don't save stuff on our personal hard drives. We use the company's infrastructure, things like SharePoint, etc., to go and save our information. All our working related documents sit within the company's infrastructure. Now, we don't do out of place restores to, you know, memory sticks, etc., where you've got employees running around with information. You know, we have encryption policies about our hard drives and our laptops. So these procedures need to be replicated out to the staff. They need to have an understanding of how to adhere to them. They need to understand why they're important to be adhered to, and so and it is without doubt an enterprise-wide touch point that we need to have with all of our employees.
So Don, Gareth said, you know, we update the policy and then we inform the people on how we make that, and they must understand, and then we add here. How do we ensure that this is not just a top-down from the hill, this is the new policy, and then it's never spoken of again? How do people enact this as part of their everyday work?
So remember when we said now, so you've got the 3 legs of the pillar, and one of those legs is very much the people part of things, which is things like change control, user change control. Grant mentioned this as well. Culture. It's a simple thing. You know, you've got to change your culture. It's something that has to be, when you work with it, people has got to understand, you know what, this is in everybody's best interest to actually protect us. Information is actually the most expensive thing in a company. It's currency in today's time, and you not handling it with care is effective. You just throwing around money. That's down to.
Okay, and you guys have had a lot of experience, Grant and Don, because of the Bytes Business Solutions, where Altron came from, your roots. So I'm sure you've bumped heads a couple of times, which has arrived at this Altron almost a governance in a box framework we're going to talk around now. When you enter a company, Grant, how do you know that you're going to have an uphill battle with regards to them accepting the right way or embracing the right way to get a governance framework in place? What are the warning signs for you that this is going to be a long, hard slog?
Daniel, one of the big red flags is typically, we have a proven methodology and we have proven ways of going about this. And if we find that organizations want to resist, from those learnings, and ultimately, one of the things we always mention is try and build the plane while we're flying it. It's going to be a very difficult battle rather than planning it up front correctly. That's key. And we have to reiterate that planning up front. So our methodology has a very big planning component associated to it. And if people want to skip that due to costs or due to just timeframes or whatever the case may be, it's going to impact a project, and ultimately it could cost you at the end of the day, because the proper planning wasn't done. So, like I say, I use the analogy building the plane while you're flying it. Another example is not understanding what their key business drivers are. Why are they doing this data governance framework? What is their key inputs? What is their key drivers? But what is their key requirements associated to that? So we need to go through those elements and understand it, so that we're always aligning this, process and these policies and everything that we do with it to the objectives of the organization and what they want to achieve. Another one is when there's definitely disparity or disconnects between various organization entities. That contributes to quite a bit of a problem sometimes, where ultimately data can be disparate, but when different entities don't want to interact with each other and you get portions adopting, not other portions, you're also going to potentially have some challenges around that. So those are to mention some of the things that we typically see.
Okay. Gareth, you wanted to add something in there. I saw that.
Yeah, it's actually that latter one that Grant was referring to there, right? Especially in the larger businesses, it's like, well, really, why is this problem mine? Do I really own the data? Shouldn't this be IT's problem? Shouldn't this be legal's problem? Shouldn't this be? So the problem is a lot of entities within some of these bigger companies, trying to move the buck, trying to pass the buck, and they think that it might have a relatively low touch point to them. But in hindsight, when you get deep into it, and you get into the mechanics of it, you then realize that there are multiple stakeholders that are going to have some impact or some form of intervention on helping to sort out the information landscape.
Okay, so you guys must often come across this.
All the time. I call it the brainstorming game.
You call it? You faded out there. You must talk into your mic.
I said I call it the brainstorming game, right? Where they essentially, will either blame or try and move it, or try and shift it back, or try and not take responsibility for it. And at the end of the day, let's look at a line of business. A line of business creates information, okay? The privacy office wants to, say, protect it and maybe remove it because it's met its retention, it's met its life. They ultimately can't make the decision on the data. They firstly have to go back to that line of business, the custodian, and say, this data has met its life, or this data is of such nature. Can you review it so that we can take action on it? And once they've reviewed, then it goes back to the privacy office in essence, and then they'll take the action on it. So it's that type of scenario.
Okay, so that corporate salute, we get away from it by putting in a framework in the right place that allocates responsibilities. I just want to circle back to what Grant was saying. You said C-level involvement, key business drivers need to be understood, organizational objectives need to be clear, disparate organizational entities who are on their own mission can scupper it. You're almost talking about federated solutions where egos get in the way. And I was in a meeting the other day where someone took pride that they've got 4 or 5 ERP systems in the group because everyone can make their own decisions. So how does the Altron solution get people on the right path by identifying stakeholders? Do you help people to identify the right C-level who should be involved, or do you have a C-level workshop to explain to them data governance and keep them out of prison? Where would you go to from a a first port of call, up or down? John,
So Daniel,
you've been quiet for a while. Okay, Grant, you can go. You were diving in there.
Okay, no, go for it. Don't go for it.
So it's a bit of a balancing act. What we typically find is, and Grant mentioned this now as well. So in the beginning, when you do your planning, there's a lot of digging that happens, which is why this is not a finger snap process. There's a lot of digging that happens. We actually go and do a full analysis of the data. We look through various tools that we can deploy, who the owners of that data is, and we start with them because they're our first stakeholders. And then you might, for example, get to somebody and say, but I just use the folder or the data, but my department head or my department manager is actually the owner. And then you go to that person. I think and it's something as well that Gareth alluded to, this where there's this blame game that happens, or this direction of responsibility that shifts the whole time. It's one of the biggest things. If you ask a user or a person on a network, so who owns this data? 80% of the time we get the response, well, it's not me. Yeah, the person saves stuff in there, and then you have to actually, and it comes back to the administrator or business question as well, because then now we have to go dig. Is this actually the administrator or is this actually a user? If I go and I go Control A delete, who's going to shout? Okay, that's where the question comes. So I need to go find that person that's going to shout if I do that. Because if we implement a policy and all of a sudden move that cheese, somebody is going to shout at me. And I need to, I would like to know who that is before I do that. So there's a whole, once again, planning, architectural thing that happens here before we even actually touch the data to make sure.
What sort of skills make up a team that's responsible for gaining momentum on a data governance framework within an organization? So if we walk in, what are you expecting the customer to bring, and what would you bring to the party, or what meets in the middle there?
Insight and patience.
Okay, that's an attribute. What sort of skills are we coming in there? What?
So
if you signed, if you signed a group tomorrow, who do they need to bring to the table for you, Gareth?
So here's the thing, right? So some organizations have tremendous scale and budget, and they might have business analysts and project managers and all of those good things. But there are also companies out there where they are not papaya attorneys, GDPR attorneys, they don't understand this discipline, is not really their core business, well, this is where we can come in. So essentially, we can provide the project managers, we can provide the legal opinions around what the policy should be stating. We can provide, systems analysts, tool implementers. So we can provide turnkey, end to end. And sometimes what we do is we go to a company and we say, right, the company might provide a project manager because that's something that they have to work in conjunction with the Ultron Micro Focus project management team. So we see a blend. And typically, and I'm going to be very straightforward here, typically most organizations don't have the luxury, of having a very highly skilled expert or a privacy office or any of these things, right? So this is why we ultimately decided as a vendor, because we're a software vendor, we create technology, but tools are only 20% of this discipline. And in order to be of value to the South African customer community, this is why we partner with Ultron, right? Because we need to bring those people and process elements around it. And the customer can cherry pick if you want, which skill set he might not have or might need. But I mean, typically, it's something we can provide end to end.
John, did you want to add anything in there?
So so I think that's the thing as well, to go with Gareth has said, is we've obviously from an organizational perspective, we've gone through these exercises quite a lot. So we know what we need to bring to the room in the first place to actually make a project like this a success. And in the beginning, it's, for example, a business analyst, and then it switches over, for example, to an architect, and then it switches, and then overarching over that, obviously you've got somebody in the line of a project manager that ties everything together, because there's a lot of loose strings that needs to be checked from a top level, and then from there on, technical. But once again, it's a methodology that we've built because we've gone through this exercise. We know what works, we know what doesn't work, we know how long these things can take. So yeah.
Okay. So from a customer side, the C-level involvement is key, because someone needs to be paying for this thing and have a big enough stick to enable it. And then someone who owns the data, who's a custodian of that data, who could walk the path with the Altron team, would be really good. But otherwise, you're just looking for passion and commitment and organizational understanding, and then you guys can do the rest of it. Grant?
Yeah, so then we need to understand, you kind of summed it up, but we need to understand that the total landscape currently, what is the as-is state, and where is the information, because the challenge with finding things later on, a change of scope potentially, and you don't want to do that, and that's why the planning phase is so important for us. And we need to make sure that
planning phase you've come back to a number of times, and I think that's a really, really important one for all of our listeners. Is that the message I'm getting from the team here is measure twice, cut once. So there's going to be a lot of time to do the planning in order to get the data governance to suit the customer environment. So you've got a base plate, but you're not going to ram it down. You're going to go and see how it applies.
You're going to benchmark it.
Okay, that's cool. That's nice. So how would you advise a client to take their first steps in getting this journey started? So we're looking at a federated environment. Everybody's doing their own thing. We know that Popea is coming, and we've got to start here. How would you suggest they start? Grant, because you've been quiet for a while.
So ultimately, first thing is to engage us. But,
that's such a cheap trick answer.
Sorry, Daniel, I had to. But no, if in reality is, I mentioned it before in the planning, we need to understand what is the drivers that they're doing. So legislative drivers is a big thing. Here was it, and Papea's not been around. It's been around for a long time, actually. It's just been in the last year or so gained huge momentum due to the fact that it's being enforced now. So at the end of the day, legislative drivers are key. We know that. We know that's the driver for everybody that holds PI information or SPI information or any of that type of information. However, you need to understand what is it that you want to do with your information. You need to understand your business drivers. You need to understand the scope. And sometimes organizations don't understand that. So they need to engage, and they need to clarify that, and they need to at least get a high level type of framework. And there's methods of understanding that and getting that information. And once you've got that, you can start your journey.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there and ask you another question, and maybe this is for Gareth. How do you think this is felt by the users in the high volume areas, the contact centers, the collections areas, the maintenance and manufacturing? What's the area that's first impacted, in your opinion? And I hate this. I think I'm going to vomit as I say it. I apologize to all the listeners, but what's the area of low-hanging fruit? Consulting speak. Okay, go. Sorry to everybody, all our guests.
So I think, the first thing is, let's talk about the area of low-hanging fruit. Okay, we'll start off there before we get onto the user impact. So in reality, us human beings are shocked at keeping everything. Okay, especially when it comes to information. We have this dreadful legacy of, I don't want to use the word dark data, but a dreadful legacy of stale data that sits within our landscape, which we have failed to manage for decades. And that information has a significant cost behind it. If everything in a data center today, it costs about 4 times more to manage it than what it costs to house it. So the reality is that the low-hanging fruit is, once we get through all the the information and we've scuppered our way through it, and we understand what is obsolete, trivial, of no value to the organization, we simply then defensively dispose of it all, right? And we get to it. And that has a massive cost savings to the organization. The other thing is, that's a piece of low-hanging fruit.
So you just declutter the garden. Essentially, you cut back the trees, you cut the grass, you just expose how big the landscape is as a first off. So you would go to high volume areas and high storage areas and say to them, let's start there. So it's actually low impact on the organization, but high impact in the finance area.
High impact on things.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and then the second element is that really, do we understand how things relate to one another as far as information topics are concerned, right? And if you look at a legal case, what do you need for that legal case? You need to understand how all the topics relate to one another. Are they the unaltered? Are they the single points of truth? Can you see the sequence of events? Now, because we don't completely understand the information that's sitting within our data centers, and I'm using that term loosely, because we don't understand it and we haven't touched it, okay, we then struggle to understand how things actually relate to one another. So one of the nice things about this exercise is we look at the information landscapes, whether they be structured, unstructured, structured, but essentially we can have a single pane of glass, and I'll use maybe that term, or a single point of view that we can actually see how all this information relates to one another. Okay? And that helps for good business decision making. It'll help HR understand the sequence of events. It'll help legal to go and fight a case because we can start joining all the dots together. So those are some of the soft, tangible, kind of low-hanging fruit elements that come as a result of this.
You say that it's like something going up my spine there. Come on, Gareth. Okay, so we take those easy to embrace areas, and is that part of the Don? Is that part of the methodology that Gareth is alluding to? That Altron would give a paint by numbers to a customer and say, let's start with these areas. We've had the presentation from the C-level who doesn't want to get arrested because of papaya or whatever. We go look at the heavy areas, or we do a content audit before to identify just how much content we have. Then we go and sort out the ones that we can with little or no impact, and then we start to get more specialized. Is that kind of the sequence of events that you guys recommend?
So Daniel, yes, and to get back to your example, paint by numbers starts at number one, and number one is you need to understand your landscape. Okay. Your risk is. So whether you're cloud-based, whether you're Windows server-based, Linux server-based, you need to understand your landscape. That's the big thing, and that's the very first step in the methodology. Is now you've had the presentation from C-level, and they don't want to get arrested. Where do you start?
Okay.
The first thing you have to start with is go sit down, and you sit down, for example, with our team, and you say to them, well, this is the journey that I want to go on. Help me understand my landscape so that we can understand the risk together, so that we can help you get to the second step, which might be some companies, or it might be engaging with stakeholders. Some companies, it might be a completely different step, depending on what your organizational requirement is.
But you have a definite, there's no guesswork involved from an Altron perspective. It's a discovery from a client perspective. So you've got a 1 to 15 step that we can follow. And if step 3 is not needed, you cross step 3 off and you move. Because the next question, which is going to be the tough one for Grant, is this not simply an expensive business analysis intervention from Altron's perspective where you're trying to take money from me? Whoa,
so Daniel, no. So in mind, we bring best practices in our methodology. So one of the things that we've got within our methodology is a set. You mentioned your 15 step, just as your example. Those 15 steps are based on specific criteria or ways that we look at things. You can try and do it yourself, but the lessons that we've learned are being passed on. And with micro focus, that's best practices that we've learned. So we'll circumvent a lot of the pain that people go through. Remember, Don also talked about that risk-based approach. So understanding the risk-based approach is one of the elements that we do. And that might be sufficient for a certain set, to get you up to speed to a certain level. And we also impart a lot of this knowledge as we're going along. So it doesn't mean that we're going to be there forever. We work with our customers as partners and the enablement of them to actually adopt that. Again, going back to what Gareth says, a lot of organizations don't have that set of skills. So no, I don't think it's a very expensive business analysis, intervention.
So there is a tangible I'm going to leave them with.
Yeah,
that's going to go
there's
behind.
A tangible. There's experience. There's approaching it correctly rather than reiterating it multiple times. There's a multitude of things that's brought to the table. Yes.
Don, do you have a rapid realization plan that's out there? Do you have a fast track for our customers that are a little bit ahead of the game? They've got lots of BAs, they've got a CDO, they've got a digital led drive, they're on this transformation drive. Is there something that you can plug holes, or do I have to take the entirety of this intervention, this framework?
No, so that's exactly, and that's a very good question, because you might be sitting right now thinking, this is a massive journey, and then some of the guests might be thinking, but I've already done half of this. So one of the first things that we also look at when we actually sit down with you is we do a bit of a gap analysis. So if you have a very good understanding of your landscape, then a lot of your gaps are already plugged, and we only need to actually help you bridge them. But if you don't have that understanding, then we can advise you. And also one thing, even though there's a methodology in place, it's very much a type of an agile methodology that we can tailor it and fit it to your organization. And one organization is going to take a few days, each organization will take a few weeks. So there's different ways we work with the organization. And we also, firstly, and we said this now as well, business drivers are very important. If you come to me and you say, I have a week, there's no sense in me turning around and say to you, well, sorry, but this is going to take a month. We need to actually assist you, and we need to tailor this to get you out of a risk situation.
But you're still going to maintain the integrity of the framework by saying I have a week so we can show intent, but we're going to look at the framework. So Gareth, are we putting colors, Altron and Micro Focus, putting colors in there that this is the framework that's there, and we're going to embed that in the organization and leave it there? Does it make it a tangible, we can hang our hats onto this thing, and if I walk from the outside, will I be able to identify that this framework is there?
100%, and it's something that stays and will differ from organization to organization. We do customize it slightly because a medical organization might operate slightly different to a telco.
From a manufacturing,
a bank, looking at Dodd-Frank and various other legislative methodologies and frameworks. So, but typically it's something we stay. It's not a checkbox, right? So you don't go in, clean up the data, anonymize it, mask it, encrypt it, whatever the case may be, and say, well, guess what, we're done. It's something that exists, well, for as long as that organization's around, right? So and we do sometimes take our standard framework methodology. We, as Don said, we look at the customer, what have you done so far? Because a lot of have gone out and done various aspects, right? They've gone and done a risk assessment and so forth. And then what we do is we show them our framework. And typically, within that first few months of consulting, we tend to make a small little pilot of this, right? A little pilot methodology as part of our deployment. And we run that little pilot with some test users and with some test data and make sure that the flow and everything is correct and it kind of makes sense. And then, of course, we expand on it. And we slowly but surely add more and more of the information landscape.
Grant, do you think, hand on heart, this increases a company's agility, or do you think it's adding bureaucracy where we've been getting stuff done before and now we are ticking boxes, to quote Gareth? And how?
Hand on heart, it increases agility. It adds huge value to an organization. You know, we and maybe it's just because we're passionate about data and, you know, the elements of data that we bring to the table, data governance, data privacy as such. But I think at the end of the day, and everybody knows this, not uncommon, data is, and Don mentioned this, is like a currency for your organization. It is your information. And if you are able to use that information wisely and gain insights into that information effectively, it'll add huge value. You know, the problem with systems, you mentioned ERP systems in the beginning. If that system's not, you know, if it's not configured correctly and it doesn't allow you to know a problem, or there's something inside that data that doesn't act correctly, ultimately it might cost you. So doing proper data governance actually not just adds value, it saves money, it adds efficiencies when it's done correctly.
Awesome. I want to ask, what would change in an organization through embracing this framework, Don?
Responsible data management, I think, is the short answer to that. But they also, remember, Sanana, I mentioned earlier, I mentioned the user change part of this. So this might be things like, where are you saving your data? That's type of a user change control process. How would you be handling certain files? There's this term that I like to use. It's basically grey matter decisions. So which you effectively have to, you just need to actually be a little bit more cognizant of the data that you work with, and that is a user training process. It comes back to culture. So that is something that we see actually changing quite a lot on a lot of these implementations. One of the things that we have that actually is very pivotal to the project success is user change control and the cultural change that you're trying to make. So that is definitely a change that happens. Apart from the way that you might be saving the data or where you might be saving the data, like Gareth said, no, they as an organization, for example, don't save stuff on their hard drives. They save it into online platforms. But that was obviously a user change that happened over time. So it doesn't happen like it happens over time. So that's the type of change that we see. Where users find their data, that's the other thing. If you implement a tool, for example, a records management platform, one of the changes that you might see is typically somebody would go into SharePoint and go search for something. That might, for example, change to now a records management platform, which is a change on the user side to get used to, and there might be a few frowns about it. But the bigger net effect of you now doing that is your data is safe and your data is governed. Not that I'm saying SharePoint isn't a governance platform as well, but there are different way of doing things, and depending on what you decide.
Microsoft's listening to you, buddy. You were saying that they guys, we are coming up to 12 minutes left. I'm going to start asking some tough questions, but we've had a question from the audience which I thought was quite a good one. Not that the others haven't been good, but this one is particularly on point. Industry experts suggest that a global org can face up to 15,000 separate regulations that mandate the specific handling of information. What is the best approach to create a framework that will optimize information governance and ensure regulatory compliance? I think you've covered it, but I just want to be sure. And if I parrot it back to you, that means that you've really done an amazing job, which is, first of all, understand what the organization's C-levels need is for this governance. What are the objectives behind it? Is it just a tick box and a compliance and store this stuff? Once we've got that, do a content audit, which will come and identify islands of data, sources of data, and then allocate responsibilities, clean the garden, cut the hedges back, and then start to plant and do fancy things. So I hope that's answered our audience member, because now we're getting onto the tough ones. Is there anything in this governance framework that's going to help a client be cloud ready for this hybrid world we're living in? Gareth?
Yeah, without doubt, right? I mean, this is the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges we see today. Okay, we are fast existing in a hybrid world. okay? A mix between on-prem and in the cloud, okay? You know, cloud providers are not the ones who are going to provide you with information governance, okay? They're going to provide you with a platform to store information, okay, so that users within the enterprise can go and access that information in the cloud. We often get the question, where do we deal with this? You know, well, firstly, if you're going to move some of those workloads to the clouds, ultimately it would be nice if we get in beforehand to understand that information is, what it consists of, what level of importance it is, and then move only what to the cloud. Okay, but that isn't always the case. That doesn't always come first. Okay, so some organizations have part of their information in the cloud already, of which they have limited or little understanding about. So, you know, we have the ability to actually help them manage this in a hybrid world. So if we make a change today about a piece of information, we don't really care where it sits, whether it sits in the cloud, whether it sits on-prem. You know, if you move to the cloud, well, it's advantageous to clean it up first before moving it. However, if it's already there, we can help you manage the discipline in the hybrid world. Which is one of the kind of real benefits of what we have on the table here today. Because if you're a privacy officer and you want to remove, say, Daniel Robus's details from systems, you know, your details might exist in 40 places within that company. You know, if you look at
Mrs. Daniel, I got one of those from the bank. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, if we're going to want to remove your information or make a change to your information, or, you know, ultimately we want to see where Daniel exists, not only on-prem, but also where he potentially exists up in our cloud stores. And it's a massive benefit because cloud still has a cost. Yeah.
John,
So
you were having a chuckle there. You're having a chuckle about sources of data and silos of data and missing data and cleaning data. I mean, data is just, you said it earlier, the new currency that's out there. It's the way to monetize stuff. People are leaving money on the table if they don't look at the Ultron solution. Is there a sort of handover that we give to customers that they can then get their digital ambitions realized through data?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just going to use a simple example. So one of the things that we look at right in the beginning is, for example, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. Now, let's say you want to move into the cloud or you want to migrate into the cloud. You know, that's already a cost-saving exercise that we go through. We don't move your raw data into the cloud. It's absolutely unnecessary because you haven't used it, or it's copies or things like that. So no, there's definitely some benefit here, especially cost saving, because everything you move into the cloud, you pay per gig storage or in block storage. So you don't want to move unnecessary stuff. So even before we start looking at classification and taxonomy and governance itself, right there is a cost saving benefit. So to get back to your question, Nana, that you also asked, Grant. So yes, there's obviously a thing like this has got a cost implication to it in your organization, but there's some real cost saving benefits as part of this governance and classification that actually happens with information lifecycle management.
Okay, that's exciting. So guys, we're coming fast to the end of the session. I'm going to ask you each the same question, and I'd like your answer on it. So the question is, from your organization, what is your focus for the next quarter? What are you most excited about from a technology perspective, release in the next half year? And then very quickly, 3 pieces of advice for a customer that's embarking on a data governance journey that you would give now. 1 piece of advice. We've got little time, so I'm not going to let you do a Daniel and lecture forever, but I'm going to start with you, Gareth. So do you need the questions again, or are you happy?
No, luckily my goldfish brain has left the building today, so I'm with it. So ultimately, the 1 piece of advice I can give a customer is plan, and plan some more. Right? Really of the hard, heavy thinking is done up front, right? The investigating, the understanding, the procedures, the policies, the processes, and more planning. And think about all the things that could stop you getting through this journey. You know, security considerations, people, etc. What I'm excited about in terms of product development over the next year is that Micro Focus really are driven as an organization to take out a lot of the manual processes associated with this discipline, right? And every day goes by, our developers are working harder and harder at bringing in more automated features to help manage the burden of this discipline. Okay, and I'm talking features that exist within the tool. So, you know, we already have a degree of machine learning, already have a degree of auto classification. You know, we already have a seamless integration between the engines that discover stuff and the engines that manage stuff. But as we head further and further down into this discipline, so we are moving more towards containerization, more towards cloud methodologies, more towards automation. And we refine this thing as we go around the world. We take these learnings. So fortunately for us in South Africa, we got a few learnings from the boys up in Europe who were doing the GDPR, and that started a lot earlier. And luckily, we've taken a lot of those learnings and we've implemented them into South Africa. And we had to make some changes because there are things here that are different in terms of the way we operate. So my most exciting aspect of this is more automation, being driven down by the tools, you know, really making the management of this and the life cycle of this a lot easier for a customer.
Awesome. There's a whole different session we need to have on RPA, robotic process automation, chatbots, and AI. We're not going to do anything now. Okay, moving. Grant, what are you most excited about that's coming out of the Altron Group in the next year? And what advice would you be giving? And then what's your focus for the quarter?
So Daniel, excited about the fact that we're just growing our data privacy practice from strength to strength, and with partners such as Micro Focus, you know, that enables us from a technology aspect. Another thing I'm loving seeing at the moment is, you know, as the maturity of organizations advance, we are able to realize some of the really cool technologies that are coming down the line or in play at the moment. We mentioned some of them, the AR, the RPAs and stuff like that, and the analytics that we can bring to the table associated to the benefits of this data governance or data privacy element, you know, cognitive services as such even. You know, there's so much that we can bring to the table in the realization of those technologies as such. And I think that's some of the things that I'm excited about. From a piece of advice, I'm going to reiterate Gareth's point. I said it in the WhatsApp. Plan. Understand your landscape and definitely understand your risk-based understanding. You know, don't go try and solve a problem that's not a problem. It's not a risk at the moment. You know, try and see what you need to solve now that will benefit your organization up front.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Don, 1 minute from your side.
I'm going to tie in with what Gareth and Grant has said. So planning. You need to understand what your landscape looks like. You need to understand what your horizon looks like. So that's the first thing. As far as me being excited about some technologies, and I think Gareth very quickly alluded to this now, is there's a technology that's actually been actively carried on development, and they are actually sharpening this up quite extensively, is the contextual search functionality that we have in some of these tools.
Okay.
It is a brilliant feature. It is extremely strong, extremely agile, and the business value that you can actually get out of the contextual searching is just, it's beyond.
Okay.
As far as advice, like I said, the biggest thing is you need to plan, you need to understand your landscape. When you stand, you need to understand what your horizon will look like. It might shift, but it's very important that you have a very clear view. And if you don't have that yet, that you actually go on somebody with that journey to get you to a point where you've got a very clear view, because information lifecycle management is not a tick box item. It is a long-term goal. We're talking about 5+ years here. So whatever you do now will have a very long lasting effect on your company. You need to make sure that you take that journey with the right partner.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, guys, the hour has flown by. Gareth, I'd like to thank you from Micro Focus and what you're doing with the team at Altron. Don and Grant for representing Altron security and their data privacy side and the data governance. For me, what summed up the last hour was a clever man learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others. So go and have a look at the Altron framework to get your data governance by design going, because they've already made the mistakes and have perfected it. From my side, Daniel Robus, thank you for listening to me facilitate for an hour. I hope it was a beneficial session. And look out for the next ones from Altron. I believe there's a series coming out. Should be excellent. Thank you, gents. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.